student, welcome to massive open online course on Indian economy. Present module entitled Education Policy in India. After completing this module, you are able to understand the evolution of the national education policies in India. You are also able to know the distinctive features of the past education policies in our country, and the present module also helpful to understand the features or recommendation of new national education policy 2020. The module consists with 7 sections. Section 1 introduces the theme, whereas Section 2 describes the evolution of the national education policies in our country. Section 3 describes the salient features or distinctive features of national education policies 1968, whereas Section 4 describes the national education policies 1986. After that, Section 5 deals with the program of action 1992 and national policy for ICT in 2012. And finally, Section 6 describes the distinctive features or the recommendations of new national education policy 2020. We are all aware that education is a very important ingredient for the human development, not only for human development, for the development of the whole of the economy. Therefore, after independence, the nationalist government emphasized on the development of the indigenous education system. Accordingly, Government of India established different education commission to recommend and suggest different policies to develop the indigenous education system in our country. As a result, on the basis of the recommendation of different education commission formed by different time periods, Government of India introduced national education policies. The first national education policy was introduced in the year 1968, and subsequently there were a number of education policies. Second education policies in the year 1986, and third and latest education policy was introduced in the year 2020. In between these two, that is second and third education policies, there are two specific program or policies related to the development of education in our country. Section 2 gives an outline of the evolution of the national education system or education policies in our country. For 20 years after independence, there was no effort to change the education policy in our country, and the nationalist government in India, they actually followed the education policy introduced by the British ruler. In the year 1964, Government of India set up a commission which is called the Kothari Commission to recommend and suggest the education policies for our country or for India. And accordingly, the Kothari Commission, they submitted their report, and on the basis of their recommendation, Government of India introduced her first national education policy in the year 1968. After the first education policy 1968, this education policy also revised time to time, and subsequently we have observed the second education policy in the year 1986, and the third as well as latest education policy, which is called New National Education Policy 2020. In between second and third national education policies, that is in between 1986 and 2020, there were two separate programs or two distinctive initiatives for the education policies in our country. One is in the year 1992, which is called Program of Action, and another is National Policy for ICT in the year 2012. Now we come to the first National Education Policy 1968. What are the distinctive features of the first education policy 1968? Now we will discuss one after one. And these distinctive features of the education policies of 1961, actually the recommendation made by the Kothari Commission. This is our first indigenous education policies. As per the recommendation of the Kothari Commission, there was the provision of free and compulsory education. That is, all children must undergo compulsory education up to the age of 14, and primary education should be free due to the widespread poverty in our country. Side by side, this commission also emphasized on the development of the working condition as well as education of the teachers. There was the provision to increase the salary of the teacher. Side by side, there was the provision to independent research and publication as well as to increase the academic qualification of the teacher in this first education policies in our country. This education policy also recommended three language structure. Hindi and English are the compulsory language. Side by side, there was also the provision for the third language, which is called the regional language. And the policy also recommended education opportunities for all. There was no division between male and female, no division between backward region as well as developed region. Similarly, there was no division between general caste, SC, ST, or even across religions. That is, the commission established the education system which is universal in nature. This education policy also emphasized on the science education, because science education is the main pillar for the development of our country. And the National Education Policy 1968 also emphasized on the agriculture and industry, and accordingly there was the provision to set up at least one agriculture industry in every state in our country. There was also the provision for the common structure of education, which is called 10 plus 2 plus 3. That is, from primary to secondary school, it's 10 years, then higher secondary school, 2 years, and finally the graduation for the 3 years. This structure is called 10 plus 2 plus 3 structure. This education policy, that is National Education Policy 1968, also recommended other principles such as work related with experience and national service, talent identification, book production, experimental education, secondary education, university education, part-time education, as well as correspondence courses, promotion of literacy and adult education, games and sports, and minority education. Now we come to the second education policy in our country, which is called National Education Policy 1986. In these education policies, there was the provision for the common structure of education in our country, which is called National System of Education. Actually, they recommended the education pattern of the earlier education policy, NEP 1968, that is 10 plus 2 plus 3. Now this is the national system of education. And there was also the provision for early childhood care. And for the development of the early childhood care, the government established integrated child development scheme, that is ICDS, and this early childhood care also interacted with ICDS program for the development of the early childhood care in our country. This second education policy 1986 also emphasized on the elementary education and Operation Blackboard. This national education policy has given a new thrust of three aspects of elementary education, which are universal enrollment, universal retention of children up to 14 years of age, and a substantial improvement in the quality of education. The policy also recommended for the education of handicapped. This new national education policy 1986 laid stress on the education of children with locomotor handicaps, and other mild handicaps should be common as the normal children. Side by side, it also emphasized on the vocational education at 10+2 level, that is at the higher secondary level. After the implementation of second education policy in the year 1986, government also set up different commission to change or modify this particular education policy in our country. Accordingly, in the year 1991, government set up the Janardhan Reddy Commission. And this Janardhan Reddy Commission considered the recommendation of the earlier Education Commission, which is called the Rammurthy Commission. Along with this recommendation of the Rammurthy Commission, this Janardhan Committee, they also modified the features of earlier education policies, that is 1986. On the basis of this recommendation, they emphasized a report, and this report is called as the Program of Action 1992. This program of action, actually the report on the basis of the modification of the education made by Janardhan Reddy committee. And in this particular action program, that is called Program of Action 1992, there was the provision of 23 sections which are related with different level of education, as well as this also this report also emphasized to remove different sorts of inequality in the education system. After 1992, government also made some commission to change the education policies in our country, and in the year 2012, government established a committee and they recommended for national policy for ICT, information and communication technology. And this policy is important because they realized that year after year, day after day, information and communication technology were emerged as an important tools in education system as well as in other fields of the economy. Therefore, the committee emphasized different features of information and communication technology and their applicability in the education system. Accordingly, this particular policy is treated as the National Policy for ICT 2012 in our country. Now we come to the latest education policy, which is called New Education Policy, New National Education Policy 2020. After the revision of the different education policies, this is the first education policies of the 21st century. Not only that, this education policy also introduced after a long gap of second education policy. Second education policy was introduced in our country in the year 1986, and after that in 2020, there was the third education policy. In between these two, there was no national education policies, but there are some reforms regarding the education systems in our country. And in these new education policies, they changed the Ministry of Human Resource Development to the Ministry of Education. Side by side, this policy emphasized to develop the education in such a manner that India will become the global knowledge of superpower. This global knowledge of superpower is important because day after day Indian economy also growing and its economic size also expanding. Therefore, Government of India also emphasized Indian economy to enhance in respect of the education Accordingly, a transformative reforms measures, a series of transformative reforms measures introduced in 2020 to develop the education system which are much relevant in the changed scenario. In this new education policy, National Education Policy 2020, the school education or the pattern of education changed. In the earlier report or in the earlier education policies, the pattern of education was 10 plus 2 plus 3. There was no provision for the early childhood care. But in this report or in this national education policies, the education structure would be 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. This 18 years of schooling, this 5 years is related with the foundational course, and foundational course will be 5 years. 3 years is under the Anganwadi as well as preschooling, and after that 2 years for class 1 and class 2. And after foundational course, the preparatory stage will be of 3 years spreading from class 3 to class 5. Then the middle stage will be of 3 years from class 6 to class 8, and finally the secondary stage will be of 4 years spreading from class 9 to class 12. Previously, this is the previous academic structure where the 10 which is called 10 plus 2 school years or 10 plus 2 structure of school education, 10 related with for the age group 6 to 16 and for the class 1 to 10, and this 2 is for the age group 16 to 18 and for the class 11 and 12. There was no provision for the early childhood care because the starting of education or admission or the age of the admission of the class 1 is 6 in the existing education system. Therefore, there was the provision for the change of the existing education structure in the new education policy 2020. Accordingly, new pedagogical and curriculum structure will be developed to set up or to execute this 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 education structure in our country. Not only that, in the school education, this policy also recommends the examination or evaluation system at the stage of 3, 5 and 8, along with the existing board examination at the age of class at the level of 10 and 12 are also there, but they will be modified. The evaluation pattern of the board exam at standard 10 and standard 12 will be modified as per recommendation of the new economic policy. And this new economic policy also emphasized on the foundation of the learning, which is called early childhood care for the age group of 3 to 6 years. And accordingly, there was the provision of universal provisioning of the quality for early childhood development. Care and education must be achieved by 2030 to ensure that all students entering grade 1 are the school ready. Therefore, this is the special provision of the new National Education Policy 2020, which is called the early childhood care and education. And this is the universal provisioning for all children in our country. The National Education Policy also emphasized on education literacy as well as numeracy. This policy emphasized that universal education by the year 2025, side by side, it also emphasized on the numerical analysis, because numerical analysis is a very foundation knowledge for the future education. And the policy also emphasized to curtail or to reduce the dropout in the school education as well as ensuring the universal access to of education for the all levels, as well as there was the provision for the to overcome the dropout, and government will achieve to fulfill 100% of the gross enrollment ratio by the year 2030, because this is an objective of the sustainable development goal, where government of India committed to achieve the 100% enrollment by the year 2030. And this achieve of universal participation in the school by careful tracking student as well as their learning levels, in order to ensure that they are enrolled in and attending school and have suitable opportunities to catch up and re-enter into the school. And to ensure this universal access to education at all levels that help us to achieve 100% enrollment, government or this new education policy prescribed a multi-pronged program to achieve this universal access to education. And it is related with the bring back dropouts, alternative centers for learning, peer tutoring, learning outcomes, build schools, that is new schools, as well as multiple pathways for the exit and entry in the education system. And these efforts help us to ensure access and opportunity to all children, as the education will be universal by the 2030. The new National Education Policy 2025 emphasized on the language education, and they recommended the education would be multilingualism, and there would be the power of the language. And accordingly, the student can learn in their own language, in their regional or local language up to the grade 5. And after that, there will be the provision of learning 3 languages as recommended by earlier education policies. There is also the provision to learn the Sanskrit language at all level of the education system. Not only that, there is also the provision to learn some classical languages. And at the 12th standard, the foreign languages are also optional. A student or interested student also can learn the foreign language as per their choice. Now, the provision of the new education policy 2020 in respect of the higher education. The major concern of the higher education in our country is that the relatively low gross enrollment ratio. At present, the gross enrollment ratio is around 26%. Therefore, the new education policy emphasized to increase this gross enrollment ratio at the higher education level up to 50% by the 2035. And accordingly, they have modified the education structure, and they introduced the new education policy 2020, introduced the lateral entry and exit of the existing education system. A student can enter in a particular course, or he or she can exit from that particular course at every time, which is called free entry and exit in the education system in a particular course. But to complete the course, there was the provision of the academic bank credit, which is called ABC. This academic bank credit, actually the digitally developed the credit system of the student, that the student learned in different courses. And when the student transformed from one course to another course, or from one program to another program, this academic bank credit help him or her to design his or her total credit in a particular program. And after completing the requisite amount of credit in a particular program, the student will get the final certificate. And accordingly, there is the provision of different form of the certification. After completion of 1 year, the student will get only the certificate course. After completion of the 2 years, the student will get advanced diploma degree. After completion of the 3 years, the student will get the degree certificate, and after completion of the 4 years, the student will get bachelor and research degree certificate. That is true sense. In true sense, this education policy is open in nature, and the main purpose of this flexibility is to increase the enrollment ratio in the higher education system. And there is also the provision of the e-learning or digital learning in this new education policy. In the higher education, there was also aim to increase 100% enrollment ratio for the youth and adult. And not only that, the multidisciplinary education and research university will be set up of the global standard, and this education policy also welcome the globalization of the higher education. And in respect of the college education, or in respect of the college, there was the special provision for the affiliation of the degree college, and this affiliation of the college will be phased out in 15 years of introduction of the new economic policy, and a mechanism will be established for granting graded autonomy to the college. This new economic policy also recommended PAREKH, PAREKH, that is, which stands for Performance Assessment, Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. A new national assessment of platform will be set up for the assessment of the in the higher education. And there was also the provision for common entrance test for the admission in the higher education institute. As per vocational education, this new economic policy is innovative or unique. In a particular report or the plan document for the period 2012 to 17, we have observed that in our country, only 5% of the people of the age group 19 to 25 having some vocational degree, which is relatively low compared to the other countries. In case of USA, it is 52%, in case of Germany, it is 75%, in case of South Korea, it is 96%. These vocational courses are very, very important, or vocational education is very, very important to develop the unique feature of the student or to get the specific job. Therefore, to emphasize this vocational training in our country, government recommended specific policies under new education policy 2025, and this policy emphasized that by the 2025 at least 50% of the learners from school level to college level able to learn any vocational degree or vocational course. This new education policy 2020 recommended integrated B.Ed course for the 4 years, and there was also the provision for scholarship of the student who are admitted or who will be admitted in the B.Ed course. It is true that there are different problems of the Indian education. The major problem is the shortage of the budget. Accordingly, Government of India introduced different education policy time to time, and the new education policy 2020 is very much important because there was the provision to increase the budget up to 6% of our GDP. Therefore, this education policy may be effective in future to develop the holistic education in our country. Thank you.